Hi, it's the OGGM, and I am blatantly using my cats to shill my vlog, because it's my birthday, and I need you to subscribe to my vlog so I can get 1,000 subs. And what's the best way to get people to look at your vlog? Kitties. All right, we're continuing our ongoing conversation regarding the deep, dark conspiracy about Dragons of Stormwick Isle and whether the individuals portrayed on the cover are the characters from the 1980's Dungeons and Dragons cartoon or not. And why would they be and why would they not be? Well, Wizards of the Coast says they're not. The creator of the show says they're not. Jeremy Crawford has said, no, they are not the characters from the show. They are an homage to the characters from the show. And the people who actually own the rights to the characters to the show, which is Disney, have also said they're not. Do they look a lot like the characters from the 1980s show and the two pieces of artwork that actually display them? I guess if you actually had ever seen the show, then sure. But it's 2022. So how many people who are going to be buying that box set today actually ever saw the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon or even knew it existed? The only people that would even recognize the characters are people who saw the cartoon in the 80s. And most of the people today who are playing D&D are not people who were playing D&D in the 80s. The 80s were old fucks like me, us Groganards, us nostalgia players, us scrubs who don't know anything about the hobby because we don't play 5e, except of course I do play 5e. I play tested 5e. So in order to milk the nostalgia bug, much like I'm milking this kitten, there would have to actually be nostalgia for the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. And the only people who would be nostalgic for the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon are people who actually saw it in the 80s or saw it in reruns in the 90s, which, most of your players now who are playing 5e are not in that category. Most of your, let's face it, 80% of your 5e players right now came to 5e recently, within the last 5 years, because of Critical Role and because of Stranger Things. So they would have no nostalgic connection to the cartoon. Your average 12-year-old, your average 15-year-old, your average 25-year-old who's playing the game now wasn't know about the cartoon, probably doesn't care about the cartoon. The cartoon is not really playing anywhere in the States as far as I know. I think it still plays like in, Brazil and some other places on second and third run. But when was the last time you saw the cartoon here on anywhere? I mean, it's not on any of the streaming channels. Some of the episodes are on YouTube, but that's about it. So there is no nostalgia for the cartoon except for people like me. And Wizards of the Coast has done their damnedest to try and disenfranchise themselves from nostalgia players, from Groganards. There's nothing in 5e that really triggers that D&D nostalgia other than, the some of the older stuff that they made that were based upon previous existing IPs like Ravenloft. But basically, 5e has been advertised and marketed for a brand new audience. Wizards of the Coast has gone out of their way to sort of separate themselves from the legacy. There's no nostalgia. There's no reason for somebody who has felt so verbally abused by 5e to suddenly go, oh yeah, I want to play 5e because the cover of this box has something that looks vaguely like the kids from a 1980s cartoon show that I kind of remember. And therefore I'm nostalgic for that cartoon show, so I'm going to buy this box set because it has images of the characters from the cartoon show. No, there's no, where is the nostalgia market? Also, I mean, sidebar, if it was actually the kids from the 1980s cartoon show, Wizards of the Coast would be milking the shit out of that. There would be stat blocks, there would be editorials. They would say, yes, these are the kids from the show. Yes, we have the rights. Here are the stat blocks. Here is why they're still there. Here's Venger. Here's everything you need to know about the 1980s cartoon. And yeah, no, they wouldn't. They haven't. It's not. And there's no reason for them to be. There's no reason because there's no nostalgia market for the kids or that show. Any 5e player who's also a Groganard, like me, has already got 5e, all right? And they've already got the player's handbook. They've already been playing it for, long enough to have the stuff. So a legacy nostalgia player like myself like some of the other older 5e people who are also, legacy players like myself, already have it. So we're not the target audience because we already have D&D 5e. And we're not going to buy a box set simply because it has these images on it, because everything we need we've already bought. I don't need another player's handbook. I already have one. I don't need to pay $40 for an adventure I can download for free from the Wizards of the Coast site, or DM's Guild for $5. So I'm not the target audience. New players aren't the target audience of that pictures because new players don't know what the cartoon is. If I showed the box set to, any of the 3 kids that I'm playing 5e with on Wednesdays and said, "Do you know who these characters are?" I already know they'd say no, because I'm playing in a game store that has a bunch of nostalgia toys, and almost every game when we're sitting at the table and there's these 3 kids who have only started playing 5e in the last year or two, they look at an action figure from the 80s and they go, "Who's that?" They look at the painting, the drawing of us, the characters like Warduke, and they go, "Who's that?" They don't know these 80s characters, so they're not the target audience. So the target audience is maybe a few people who were like, "Yeah, I remember the cartoon, and those kids look like the kids from the cartoon." And yeah, either that or it's it's an attempt to make a handshake to the legacy players like myself. Wizards of the Coast is going, "Yeah, I know we just spent a couple years making you sound like the worst villains in the world, but we're kind of sorry about that. So could you forgive us by looking at these pictures from these characters that sort of look like characters from a TV show, and go, 'Oh yeah, I remember that TV show, and here's Wizards.'" Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, other than it's an homage to the show, and I don't really know who the target audience is for that. But then most of Wizards of the Coast's marketing choices make no sense. And now, if you actually look at the pictures, glancing, you could go, especially the cover, you could go, "Yeah, that's the kind of the characters from the show, other than the fact they're dressed completely different and they're older, and you only see them from behind." And then you look at the one other art piece inside the book, and you're like, "Yeah, that kind of looks like the Cavalier dude, and that sort of looks like the thief girl, except completely different, and she's a cleric. And that's definitely Presto, but no, really, it's more of like Harry Potter than Presto." So, yeah, they passing glance, if you're familiar with the show, your brain might go, "Are those the kids from the show?" But if you look at them closer, you're like, "Well, they're sort of, but not really the kids from the show." And then you go, "Oh, well, yeah, that's because Wizards of the Coast doesn't have the rights to those images. They can do an homage. They can do 3 points of difference to make them look a lot like the kids from the show, but they're not the kids from the show." And why would they be? I don't know who the target audience would be to make them the kids from the show. Because it's not legacy players like me, because legacy players like me already have the player's handbook. And I'm not going to spend another $30 for a dumbed down version of the player's handbook and an extra set of dice and an adventure I can get for $3 or free online. So, yeah, and new players aren't the target audience because your kid new players don't have any idea. So the only target audience would be people who haven't played D&D yet, who are alive in the 80s, who have some weird nostalgia for that show, and they're like, I watched the cartoon in the 80s, maybe I played D&D in the 80s, but I haven't played in like forever. Oh, here's this box, and these kids from the cartoon are sort of on the cover, so I might be tricked into buying it because obviously this box is, a D&D version of the show. And then you open the box and you're like, "Ah, fuck, I just spent 30, 60, $80 for this box, and it has nothing at all to do with the show. But I've already got it, so maybe I'll play D&D because, yeah, nostalgia." But that's a long line of logic to get 30, $60 or however the box set from somebody, as I blatantly use a kitten to shill my vlog. So I don't know. I'm going to say they're an homage to the kids from the show. They kind of look like the kids from the show on a passing glance. They're not the kids from the show. If you want them to be the kids from the show, that's fine. There's no stats for them in the book. There's nothing in the book that says, yes, you know, if they were going to put anybody's stats in, they'd put Venger, because everybody fucking loves Venger and his nightmare. And, you know, I watched the cartoon for Venger. Venger was my boy, right? And the Shadow Demon. So, yeah. Anyways, that's the last I'm going to talk about the topic. Hopefully, we could just move on to whatever else we're upset about, like Radiant Citadel. Notice that we're not talking about Radiant Citadel much this week. Yeah, it's like I said, we'd be upset about Radiant Citadel for about 2 weeks, and then we'd move on to being upset about something else. I think we're upset about Beholders now. I don't know. Look, Kitten, Subtoy Vlog.